This is the Real Estate Interview, a series of in-depth conversations with those making a dent in the real estate business. I'm your host, Hitan Samtani. My guest today is Lucas Haldeman. He is the founder and CEO of SmartRent. It's a company that provides connected home technologies to residential landlords all across the country. And we're going to talk about sort of where Lucas sees the residential industry growing. I've been fascinated for a long time how it's sort of becoming much more institutionalized. And I think Lucas's company plays quite a big role in that. We'll also talk about connected home technologies, the Internet of Things, and sort of the changing landlord-tenant dynamics and how that impacts his business and the real estate industry. So, Lucas, thank you for being with The Real Deal.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here and excited to have the conversation.
You've been in the space for quite a while. Prior to SmartRent, you were with Colony's sort of residential division. You've done a lot of work in property management as well. Talk about sort of where the space was as a truly institutionalized asset, as opposed to these one-off assets, and where it is today.
If we focus on the single-family rental and the rise of a single-family home as an institutional asset class, I mean, in as early as 2012, that didn't exist. There wasn't an institutional asset class. It had always been large multifamily, right? And so even in large multifamily, there's a large portion of that isn't institutionally owned. So we've seen, really since the savings and loan crisis, that began the institutionalization of apartments in the 90s. That's continued to grow, but really not until after the mortgage crisis, coming out of 2012, 2013, is when all of the other sort of institutional asset classes started. And this is why I wanted to start SmartRent, because you're right. I was with Colony Starwood Homes, Colony American Homes, now part of Invitation Homes, and as the CTO of that company, I saw the need, which is you actually can't make this an institutional asset class without embracing smart technology. The costs are too high. You can't solve it with human power. And then the sort of big discovery is, by the way, we can bring that same savings to multifamily, where you have the office, you can have humans there, but you're bearing a lot of expense that you don't need. And so when you look at the build to rent space, like you mentioned with Lennar getting into, Invitation Homes is a customer of ours as well as an investor. So is Lennar, and so are some of the iBuyers. And so all that space, it's all the same. What we've learned is the transaction doesn't really matter. It could be a lease, it could be a sale, but that facilitating the access and monitoring and protecting this asset is vital to all those business models.
And so you talk about getting in with the iBuyers. What does that look like?
What we like to do is use the sales process, whether that's a prospect looking for a lease or a home for sale, is where our relationship begins, and that's where we can facilitate that access. And so we can get prospects into a home, and we have a self-guided tour platform that we've built that you can use, or you can use your own, but that's the hook in. And then part of the marketing and the upsell and the pitch is now, don't you want to live in a smart home? And it's all installed and ready to go for you. But then we benefit from that by remaining in the home, hopefully.
Talk me through at least the initial pitch might have been, talk about maybe the early days of SmartRent, where you go to, let's say, a Starwood or some other big institutional landlord and say, hey, technology needs to be part of the mix. And I don't just mean like a camera here or a camera there. It needs to be more holistic. So
yeah, I mean, this is where we really had the vision to say, this is a service that's needed in this industry, and it's not there. And so we knew that if we went out and left being an owner and left being an operator and built this, that we'd have a huge embedded customer base, because we weren't having to go to owners, and we still don't go to owners and have to sell the benefits of those. They're saying, I know the benefits. I've just been figuring out how can I actually roll this out. So if you think about this ecosystem that we've created of a large platform of many different hardware devices all coming into one platform, and that platform knows what to do with that data. So the leak sensor gets wet, we write an emergency work order in the property management system. That enterprise layer is what was missing, and owners were frustrated. They wanted to embrace smart homes, they wanted to embrace smart technology, they wanted to better protect their assets, but you can't have 9 different devices with 9 different logins in one home. And so the beautiful thing about this was there's no friction, and owners say, I've been trying to embrace this, I've been trying to figure out how to do this, I'm ready to do this, and we're sort of running downhill, to borrow a phrase from our pitch deck, of really looking at taking these large institutional platforms and converting the entire portfolio to be smart communities.
So you're talking, you wouldn't just go into, let's say a Starwood community with 200 units. You're saying we can sort of switch this on for you across 4,000 units or 5,000 units over a very compressed period of time.
Once an owner realizes the benefits of they're going to increase their revenue and they're going to decrease their expense, then there's every unit that you own, you want to do that too. This problem that we solved is a problem for everyone, and you want to use it everywhere, whether it's market rate in Jacksonville or luxury in New York. That you want this platform.
Talk to me about the market rate in Jacksonville, because that, like, you can sort of visualize the use case in one of those glitzy West Side buildings in Manhattan, but talk about the less glamorous use case.
In some ways, it's actually more impactful in the low income or market rate housing than it is in luxury. Luxury, you sort of expect it, and it's not, you don't really care. But when you go to these communities, and I've personally experienced it when I was out still doing some of the installation in the early days, and you tell someone who that they're going to save $50 a month on their utility bill, that has a meaningful impact in their life. I mean, I had people come up to me and say, I used to go out with my wife once a month, and now we get to go out twice a month because of your system. And that saving money on utilities, knowing when your kid gets home from school, they come home, they use their code to get in, that they're off the school bus, you get notified when you're at work. There's these sort of edge cases that we don't totally think about. It's not luxury, it's not glamour, but it's meaningful and it's impactful.
Rental markets have shown that they're resilient through COVID. There are a lot of indicators that show that at some point, again, home ownership is sort of going to be off the cards for a lot of Americans. So there's a lot of excitement in the investment community for multifamily, and looks like it will be there for the next 4 or 5 years. What sort of interesting, sort of on the edge things are you seeing in multifamily in terms of ownership, in terms of application of technology, anything that it might impact your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty amazing to see how quickly ownership is adopting technology. And I think part of the underlying reason is what you're alluding to, is it's become very competitive. So part of having a lot of interest in the space, a lot of money in the space, means we're seeing cap rates go the wrong way. And so owners are saying, okay, well, I want to keep buying. I have a long-term thesis, and I can kind of whittle away the edges. But if I could apply technology, I can actually change my cap rate. So if I traditionally am underwriting this to a 4, I may be at a 4.5 with technology. And so it actually, in a way, is allowing them to win deals and win more deals. So a lot of our customers are winning more deals and buying more units than others, because they have this sort of inside knowledge. They can increase their revenue and decrease the expense. And I think as we look at sort of the most impactful piece of that going forward, is we're finally seeing multifamily, as a direct result of COVID, is now embracing the idea of a self-guided tour. This is something we pioneered in single-family rentals, because we didn't have an office, we didn't have people, you couldn't, what, I'm going to have 1,000 homes for rent and 1,000 people standing outside of them. So we came up with this idea, well, wait, what if you pre-qualify yourself and just go take a tour? It's an empty home. And multifamily early adopters were starting to do that and seeing the benefits they could have. But then COVID hit, the leasing office closed, and now everyone embraced it. They tried it. It was a reason to move, a reason to try. And what they've seen is, okay, I've eliminated a significant portion of my staff, which is really high turnover anyway, and it's a constant headache. But so I don't need all those people, and I can pay a few people more than I was, because I don't need so many. And I'm actually seeing my close rate go up, meaning people prefer a self-guided tour. That traffic closes better than traffic with an accompanied tour, and it allows flexibility for tours, which we haven't had before. We see one of the number one times that people want a tour is 7 to 8 a.m. In their local time. This is before any leasing office is open that I know of. Most leasing offices open at 10, but it's before work. And so you sort of say, hey, we're now actually able to sell our product in a more flexible way.
So I was talking with Mark Ganzi, who I'm sure you've interacted with at some point, but I was like, yeah. Mark, walk me through the dream scenario for the connected office. So he painted me this picture of like starting from the lobby all the way through your day. I haven't heard anything of the sort for residential, and I'd love to get your take on what that could look like.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think I will say I think we're at the very front end of where this is going. Like we're closer to the starting line than the finish. But I just think things that we sort of take for granted, like physical credentials and access control, is all going to be gone. Like none of that exists anymore. It's all biometric. It's all through you can't leave your thumbprint behind at work or something. Like you can leave your keys. And then I think the environment adapting to our patterns, that we as humans actually are more pattern driven than we realize, I think, like if you actually look at it. And that the interesting thing as you start to apply AI, artificial intelligence, to IoT, is that you can actually start to really create a seamless living experience where, we know when you go to the gym, we know what shows you watch, we know what music you want when you come home. And that today that's all sort of driven through scenes where I set up, so I can say, a movie scene, I want to watch a movie, and that going forward, that just becomes natural part of your environment. Your environment adapts as around you. I think that's going to be pretty interesting. I also am excited, and it's not a place where we're doing anything, but I'm excited by some of these new startups that are actually, the home itself can transform. And so through automation, an office can become a bedroom, and that's another way we can sort of solve the problem of density, is if we don't need as much space to live in, we can do that. So I'm excited by that. The sort of third piece of that really is going to be impactful is the environmental effect that can have. That we're still today heating and cooling empty spaces and wasting a tremendous amount of utilities, and that by having this sort of AI-driven building experience that we can bring down our carbon footprint. And even even just if every apartment in the U.S. that's institutionally managed had the SmartRent system on it, we could have a 4% decrease in utility consumption in the U.S. That would mean no peaker plants. They wouldn't be a thing anymore. And so that's not so far out of reach that we can't get to that. We can have a significant impact on the environment by doing that, and on our carbon footprint. So I think that to me is exciting and meaningful and very important. Sort of letting the dog walker in is great. That makes your life more convenient, but I think there's a bigger game afoot here.
On the more sour side of things, sometimes with these smart enabled devices now, there are a lot of cars that you can now open with your smartphone. They don't provide a key. There's something else. Things can go wrong. And then when there's no manual fail-safe, when there's not something that consumers instinctively know how to kind of work around, it can be quite tough. So I'm thinking of a tragedy that happened a couple of days ago in Mumbai, where there was a fire in one of these smart buildings, and the bathroom was essentially one of those. It was like a smart enabled bathroom. The entry and the exit was a sliding door, and I believe they had a blackout, or there was there was a fire, and as part of the fire, the mechanism that kicked in was to shut off the lights, and as a result, someone was trapped, and they didn't make it. So this is the side of tech that I don't know if you've considered or if you thought about, but it's not all good, right? There's some points where it can lead to some, extreme use cases like that, extreme scenarios.
Yeah, that's a terrible tragedy, but it's something we actually think a lot about and focus on making sure we have redundancy in the products that we support. And so a lot of owners will still roll out a smart lock with a backup key, and we're in favor of that. Other owners don't have a key, but it's a keypad with a code, so you can always use your code to get in. And then, in multifamily in the U.S., the good news is we have a lot of building codes that prevent us from doing things like sliding bathroom doors and things like that.
It must have been a fascinating experience, sort of going through Middle America and finding out you've got to, I guess, early on in your journey, and someone on your team right now is familiarizing themselves with like this arcane sort of situations, building codes and all that, right?
What we discovered early on is, and anyone who's watching or listening who's been an operator knows that the only thing you can say about two apartment communities is they're not the same. They're just not. Nothing is ever the same, especially when we're doing retrofitting. So we're going into apartments from the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's a journey. It's a process. So we actually, before we even give an owner a proposal, we have to have someone go walk the property and physically go walk around, take thermostats off, look at the wiring, look at the doors, and then come back and say, okay, here's what we can even do here. As the problem is, if you don't do that, you show up with something that's not compatible, and then the job slows down. And so yes, I mean, it's an arcane world of building codes and of aluminum wiring and other things like that you just don't think about, that we are experts in. I mean, it is, if you think about one of our core competencies is this great installation team we have. That's a competitive moat. Like, it was hard to build that, and it's hard to rebuild that. And it really is what I think has allowed us to scale faster than others.
I'm not only thinking about the sort of the individual differences between complexes, as you mentioned, but I'm also thinking about cultural differences in the way that a building is used by its tenants. So if you think of the classic Brooklyn sort of scene, it's the stoop sitting, right? Now, I asked this for a very specific reason, because how does technology account for those cultural differences?
It's a universal experience, but it's hundreds of different products and thousands of different potential products, so that you can say doesn't have to be the same lock set everywhere, or the same thermostat everywhere, the same sensors, that really you can kind of get a sense of vibe of what's important here. Even just things like having a thermostat that can measure humidity is vital in the Southeast and not so much in the Northwest, right? We don't have mold and we don't have problems. So I just think there are nuances to the platform that we're able to embrace and sort of embrace those cultural differences. And we think about like one that came to mind early on, we were the first smart home app to have Sabbath mode, so that people of Jewish faith who aren't supposed to use electronic locks during the Sabbath could turn off that feature and not send any data and just use a key lock. And so we try to be mindful of that and embrace how we're different and make the technology fit. Instead of making people fit the technology, we make the technology fit the culture.
That is fascinating, the Sabbath mode. And do you have sort of this concept of Petri dishes where you've got a new product or really cool offering, and you go to a landlord you already have a relationship with and say, hey, look, I want to kind of deploy this in the wild? Or is that like you only put it in once it's fully understood? Because it would be interesting if you could kind of use these labs almost, right, that are units.
Yes, it actually is the inverse, and I'll give you an example. So we launched a smart parking solution. It was one of the newest products we launched. It's getting a lot of traction. So it's how do you use IoT to manage the parking lot? So again, it's that sort of intersection of hardware, software, and human power. So not only was two of our clients a Petri dish, they came to us with the idea and said, we think you should build this. And I said, okay, well, if I build a prototype, can I try it at one of your communities? And they said, yeah, of course. And so that is the amazing thing about having the cap table that we have and having some of our largest customers be investors, is they're totally open to that. We're careful. It's not like you're not being reckless out in the field, but no, it's like, hey, let's try it, and let's try it at my property, and if it works, then we can take it out to the masses.
Any acquisitions on so we talked about what sort of tech you develop, but you're also, I'm guessing, open to licensing, acquiring companies that are already doing stuff. Like, I'm thinking of Zillow, and how they just bought Showing Time a few months ago for about $500 million. You now have the capital to go after certain tech that you might not be able to do in-house.
Yeah, we're looking at it. I think it's an exciting part of doing this event is to have that option. Whereas we weren't capitalized to do that before, so everything sort of had to be created organically. We now don't have that constraint, and so to the extent that we think someone has built something very defensible or hard to replicate, it's conversations we're having. I think the kind of exciting thing from where I sit is what we've shared with investors is our organic growth. And so we're not relying on having to go do a transaction or having to expand internationally to sort of hit the numbers that we've set forth in our decks and in our prospectus. And so that frees us to be very judicious with how and where we spend that capital. We can be really good stewards. And so we have to the extent we can get really excited about something, we're able to go do it, but we're in the driver's seat on that.
On a more personal level, you've gone from being, the guy who's working on this tech and then going and selling this tech to, as the public company CEO, there are a lot of new responsibilities. So just tell me about what your experience is like.
Transition, just as we're growing and the hyper growth you sort of quickly move out of founder mode and into sort of strategic vision mode. And so this definitely was fast forwarding that. And so I love it because it's when you start, it's what you want to do. You want to think about big ideas and vision, and then you go, well, enough of that. I got to get back to finishing the accounting, doing payroll, and then I got to go install some units. And so I think this is sort of what I personally craved. I mean, I think every entrepreneur or most entrepreneurs, when they start, this is the idea, is that you get to a point where you've proven yourself to a community, and you're given the opportunity to really go make your mark.
Are you living and dying by the quarter? Are you sort of obsessed with the earnings call? And you know what I mean? There are not so fun parts of being a public company CEO.
Yes, no, that's for sure. Even like this, where I have to say, as of June 30th, like you got to be very careful that we're clear in our communication, and we don't sort of foot fault in any way, shape, or form. That adds a level of stress. Like it's less conversational, it's less sort of fun, but it's a small price to pay for the opportunity we're given, I think. But
I am more and more interested in sort of how technology is playing a role in sort of health, but playing a role in terms of there's companies like 8 Sleep that are doing sleep monitoring. There's continuous glucose monitoring is becoming a big part of the home. There's home dialysis. There's a lot of like medical innovation happening at the home. I'm wondering if you guys have explored what the health benefits of a SmartRent stack could look like.
Yeah, I would say it's not, you're not going to see any near-term press releases, but I think it's really an interesting piece of the vision going forward. And if you think about what we did on a small scale to say, let's take 4 different hardware devices and bring them all into one platform, it's a continuation of that theme, because the other part of the platform, as I described, is it needs to know what to do with that data. So part of what we're seeing is all these different stacks of IoT devices are just little silos of data. And without a platform that actually says, I know what to do. So you have a continuous blood glucose monitor. I know what to do if that gets too high. I know how to alert your doctor. I know how to let you know of that. So I think it really is, it's not very far from our view to say, whether it's a thermostat or an air quality sensor or a heart rate monitor, that could become part of our platform. And that all these things, what makes this transformational, as opposed to just sort of cool tech and cool gadgets, is all of that working together. And even you can explore even like as you look at other segments of the population, like senior housing, that becomes even more vital. And even things like that we've looked at of like, it's like an inverse of security, which is alert someone if you don't see motion in the kitchen. You have a motion sensor and say, hey, I haven't seen anyone come into the kitchen. Like we need to do a well check, right? And so like I think there's a lot of really interesting ways this goes.
Yeah, one while you were talking, I was just thinking that if some blood glucose levels are the roof, maybe something kicks in where it opens up access to the paramedics, right? So they don't, because you've always heard those stories about them having to break the door down to get into a place. That's one way this could go. But you haven't had those kind of conversations yet? Is it safe to say it's much more of a brainstorm situation at the moment, or?
It's more of a brainstorm situation at the moment. Yeah, I mean, I think part of our push-pull as a company is continuing to innovate, but also fulfilling the hyper growth that we're going through. That we have an incredible amount of demand.
In a prior interview, you talked a little bit about some different asset classes that you could do, because technically it doesn't have to be restricted to standard market rate multifamily, right? So you mentioned senior housing now. Are there other use cases in residential that you could look at? Student housing, for example?
We have a team working on student housing, for sure. We've announced that. And yes, I mean, I think you look across residential, but not even only residential. Like we're starting to do we're starting to do work in office communities. If you think about the solutions that we brought, protecting an asset, monitoring an asset, controlling the parking lot, controlling the access, like these are commercial real estate problems as well. That's where multifamily is sort of part residential, part commercial. So we can both go into more strict residential. And that's
I want to end by asking you, Lucas, about what industries you take inspiration from. It's safe to assume that, real estate is not the tech mecca, right? And it's not necessarily the most forward-thinking industry in so many ways.
That we're a deal deal junkie industry, and the people who rise to the top are the sort of the deal driven folks, and that, creating a best in class operations platform is not always top of mind. Although I'm excited that that's changing. I mean, I think you've seen that now we're looking at these professionally managed REITs. They're talking about what's the customer journey, what's the user journey, what's my experience, in ways that I even 10 and certainly 20 years ago never heard anyone talking about. And that actually being best in class is now important. In terms of the industries that we're looking to, I think you can look at where tech is first and tech enabled, and unfortunately for us, it's the tech companies, and so that's my screen is flickering. Are you seeing that?
No, don't worry, you're good.
Sorry. So that's ironic that I'm talking about the tech industry
CEO,
having tech.
You've got a 486 Pentium or something in there.